My friend and I were heading to a new restaurant on Church Street that had gotten good reviews. To get there, we had to walk past one of the few nightclubs in Nashville, and as we were passing by, the front door suddenly swung open and two guys came out. Through the open door, we saw a Madonna impersonator on stage. My companion looked at me. I don't get it. Why are they doing that? My thoughts immediately returned to Mickey and Beth. 24 months earlier, Brooklyn. I hate bars, I exclaimed. Another search for female company had ended in failure. Mickey just laughed, but I was serious. I had been at a bar in Soho for less than an hour when a drunk girl suddenly turned around and spilled 2 glasses of beer on my shirt and pants. She apologized incoherently, and the bartender handed me a clean towel, but it didn't help. I had no choice but to go to bed early and return to my apartment. It was very humiliating to ride the subway like that. No one sat next to me. I guess everyone thought I was a bad girl. I could barely stand the smell myself. When I finally reached my stop, everyone in the car stared at me. People who ride the subway don't look at you, at least not directly, but I could still tell I was attracting attention. I just hoped there was no one I knew nearby. It's very rare to run into someone you know in New York, but I decided I was just lucky today. When I finally got to my apartment, I struggled to pull my keys out of my wet pockets. Mickey must have heard me because the door suddenly swung open and he stood in the doorway, filling the entire hallway. "Well, are we having a party here?" he exclaimed excitedly. I didn't appreciate his humor, but I didn't want to stare at a guy who was 6 feet tall even if he was a transvestite. I had moved to the Big Apple a year and a half ago, fresh out of engineering school. I had a master's degree in computer science with a specialization in security systems. Thanks to some unknown but benevolent deity, I landed my dream job at Google right out of college. Not only did they offer me an excellent salary, but they also arranged for me to move from my hometown of Nashville to New York City. My classmates envied me, and I felt pretty good about myself, at least until I started looking for a place to live. I figured that with my new salary, I could rent a nice apartment in Manhattan. When I started looking at listings, it turned out that I was right. If I was willing to share a place with 5 other people, I looked at a few listings that I could afford. The best one offered a bedroom the size of a small closet. The worst? Well, I won't even try to describe it, but you can find a description in Dante's Divine Comedy, in the Inferno. Suffice it to say that after a few search trips, all I wanted was to hide in my hotel room. This guy was in for a culture shock. "You're doing everything wrong," my Google colleagues advised me. "Forget about your own apartment. You can't afford it. And forget about living in Manhattan unless you're prepared to live in a high-crime neighborhood. You need to look in other areas. Try Brooklyn. It's where young professionals live. You'll still have to make neighbors, but at least there won't be so many that you can't remember their names. Craigslist is a good place to start." So I found myself on a street in Brooklyn, a mile from the nearest subway station, looking for an address. Along the street were charming old houses with porches at the entrance, all shaded by mature sycamore trees. But I had been warned that I wouldn't find anything there. Yuppies had bought up all the houses, started renovating them, and were reselling them at high prices. For the price of one of these renovated houses, I could have bought a mansion in Nashville. I turned the corner onto a shopping street and almost missed the address I was looking for. Right next to the restaurant was a plain entrance leading to the street. The number painted on it had faded over time, and I had to go back twice to find it. Once I found it, I walked down a long hallway that led to a landing. The apartment I was looking for was on the 2nd floor. The ad sounded good, and the rent was high but affordable. When I replied to the email with the ad, I was given an appointment to see the apartment and meet the tenants, Mickey and Beth. I wondered if they were a couple, but the ad said there were 3 bedrooms in the apartment. When I knocked on the door, I saw an eye peering at me through the peephole. And then the door opened, and I was standing face to face with a slender, attractive young woman wearing a skirt over a swimsuit. I thought. Maybe this isn't so bad. "Are you Peter Morrison?" she asked sharply. "Yes, I'm Peter," I replied. "And you must be Beth. I'm here to see about renting the apartment." When I spoke, she frowned slightly, and I thought she was bothered by my southern accent, but she just gestured for me to come in. I wanted to ask her a question, but she waved me off. "You need to talk to Mickey." We stepped out of the short hallway into a spacious living room. A man I assumed was Mickey was sitting on the couch. When Beth and I entered, he stood up and walked toward us. He was nearly 6 feet tall. Even in a room with high ceilings, he looked enormous. I felt uneasy. If he was quick-tempered or difficult to get along with, he could be a scary neighbor. But I relaxed when he politely began showing me around the apartment, pointing out its various features. It was magnificent, the most beautiful place I had ever seen. I think the modest entrance had scared off developers and lowered the rent. In any case, I liked the place. I was even more excited when I saw the bedrooms. The apartment originally had 2 bedrooms, but the large one had been divided into 2 smaller ones. To my surprise, Mickey and Beth offered me the larger bedroom. The reason for their generosity became clear when they explained how much of the rent would be mine. 60% of the total. Still, I could afford it, and it seemed like a real stroke of luck, the first I'd ever had in my life. However, when we returned to the living room, I realized that my decision was not that important. They began to ask me about my work, my past, my interests, and my lifestyle. I patiently answered their questions, but I felt as if I had been invited to some kind of exclusive club. 20 minutes later, Mickey suddenly stood up and started walking around me. Even though he was on the other side of the room, I still felt like he was towering over me. "You seem like a nice guy," he said. "I just have one question. Are you gay?" "What?" I stammered. "No, of course not." I wondered what I had done to make such an impression on him. "Oh," he said. "That's a shame. Beth and I are." I looked at them both in surprise. This man who looked like he could play soccer and this graceful young woman who looked like a dancer were gay? Then I noticed that they were both looking at me, clearly waiting for my reaction. I realized that if I wanted to live in this apartment, my next words would be crucial. "I'm not gay," I repeated, "but I hope you won't judge me for that." They looked at each other. Then Mickey burst out laughing and Beth smiled happily. "Okay," he said. "I think you can be our token straight roommate." After that, we all relaxed, and they welcomed me into their little home. It turned out I was right about Beth. She was a dancer. Of course, that wasn't her main job. She worked as a waitress at an upscale restaurant in Brooklyn. During the day, she spent long hours at a dance studio or auditioning for Broadway musicals. She had landed a few roles in the chorus, but they didn't pay enough to cover the rent. But what was even more surprising was that Mickey was also a dancer. Only he danced in a club dressed as a woman. I went to see him a couple of times, and there was something both funny and compelling about this huge man in makeup, a dress, and high heels. On weekends, he was a regular at a club in Greenwich Village, and during the day, he worked as a barista at Starbucks. I soon realized that, although I was thrilled when I came to see their apartment, they were both desperately looking for a roommate, especially one who could pay more than half the rent. So we started getting used to each other. Soon I got used to seeing Mickey with lipstick and eyeshadow. And if Beth sometimes brought a woman home for the night, I politely ignored her in the morning while I made breakfast. As for me, I think that in Beth and Mickey's eyes, I became something between a pet and a zoo animal. I'm exaggerating, of course, but they were genuinely fascinated by me for several reasons. First, I was heterosexual. Their last 2 roommates had been gay, so a straight man was a novelty to them. Plus, I was a Southerner, a creature they had seen on TV but never met in real life. My Southern accent constantly amused them. Overall, it was a rewarding experience for all 3 of us. Working at Google was also a rewarding experience. The people there were very smart, energetic, and full of ideas. When I graduated from engineering school, I considered myself pretty smart, but at Google, I quickly realized that I was just one of many. For the first few months, I felt like an imposter. I didn't know anyone, didn't know the procedures, and felt like I was at the back of the pack, trying to catch up with everyone else. But gradually, I started contributing to the team I was assigned to, and after 6 months, I decided I was going to make it. One of the requirements of my new job was to travel periodically to the company's headquarters in California. Visiting Google's headquarters in Mountain View was exciting at first, but after a few trips, the novelty quickly wore off. A direct flight from JFK Airport to San Jose takes about 6.5 hours. With a tailwind, the return flight usually takes about 5 hours, but due to the time difference, you lose 3 hours, so by the time you finally land over Jamaica, it's usually very late. Nevertheless, by 9 o'clock the next morning, you're expected to be at the office. All of this has taken a toll on my personal life. At least it would have if I had a personal life. The stereotype of an engineer is a slightly pedantic nerd. I'd like to think that I'm the exception that proves the rule. It's not that I was voted most sociable at university, but during my student years, I was definitely active in social life, at least as much as was possible while getting excellent grades. I hadn't found my soulmate, but I was actively looking for one. All of that came crashing down in May of my senior year. My parents were driving down the highway to my graduation when a drunk driver lost control of his car, crossed the median, and crashed into them. They died instantly. At the age of 21, I was suddenly alone in the world. I had already been accepted into a graduate program in engineering, but I couldn't enroll that fall semester. Instead, I spent the next 9 months in a daze dealing with funerals, attending the trial of the drunk driver who miraculously survived, settling into my new life, and grieving my parents. Except for the occasional dinner invitation from sympathetic friends of my parents, socializing disappeared from my life. MIT was understanding and let me stay for a year until I was finally able to get my bearings. By then, I had sold the family home and closed the chapter on my life in Nashville. I missed my friends and familiar surroundings, but I was glad to be distracted from the sad memories of my hometown. I headed to Cambridge. At MIT, I immersed myself in my studies, only occasionally going out for a beer with my classmates. And since the ratio of men to women among engineers was very unbalanced, I had few opportunities to meet anyone. By the time I graduated, I was more than ready to meet new people and hoped that moving to New York would allow me to do so. I had heard that the city was teeming with attractive young women and believed that I had good prospects. I was wrong. It wasn't that there weren't many single women there, it was just that they weren't what I was looking for. For one thing, many of them were older than me, often by 10 or 20 years. I didn't have anything against older women in principle, but the main thing about the ones I dated was that they seemed desperate. They were looking for a potential husband and didn't want to waste any time. I was often invited to bed and I didn't mind. But after the fun, the conversation usually turned to my plans for the future, thoughts about children, and other uncomfortable questions that I wasn't ready to answer. Of course, aside from those who were just looking for a good time, there were plenty of women my age. Unfortunately, most of the women I met seemed to be on the path to alcoholism. The women I met at bars were already half drunk when I struck up a conversation with them. The ones I asked out on dates seemed to need a couple of strong drinks to relax. Parties seemed like just an opportunity for them to drink themselves into a stupor. The last straw was when I met a drunk woman in Soho who threw beer on me. Complaining about my love life to a gay transvestite might seem like a waste of time, but Mickey and I became friends, and when I came home early in the evening and got changed, he listened patiently to my complaints. When I finally caught my breath, he shook his head. "You're doing everything wrong, kid," he said. "If you keep meeting women in bars, the only thing you'll have in common is alcohol." Taking me by the hand, he led me to his bedroom and a small desk where his computer stood. "Here's what you need to try," he said, typing a URL into the browser. A website called iContact appeared. "A computer dating service?" I asked skeptically. "You've got to be kidding." "No, man, you've got it all wrong," Mickey assured me. "Sure, a lot of those services are pretty sleazy, but this one's different. I know some people who work there." I looked at him skeptically. In the end, I let Mickey talk me into trying it. What the heck, I thought. It can't be worse than what I've been going through lately. Mickey was right when he said this service was different. The first thing I noticed was the cost. The initial fee for a year's membership was much higher than I had expected. "What kind of scam is this?" I protested, turning to my huge friend. "Don't you get it?" he asked. "This is an elite site. They set the prices high on purpose to scare off one-time customers." "Yeah, but that's too expensive for a service I haven't even seen advertised," I replied. "Exactly," he replied smugly. "They're not targeting the mass market, but a more exclusive clientele." Maybe I was tired, or maybe his arguments really didn't make sense. Either way, I entered my credit card details and clicked Enter, hoping I hadn't thrown my money away. The next screen displayed a questionnaire that I had to fill out. But while other services ask you to describe your ideal woman, as if any of us know what she looks like before we meet her, Eye Contact asked questions about me, my past, my work, my interests. I had already taken several psychological tests, and these questions seemed similar. While I was filling out this endless questionnaire, Beth came into the room and looked over my shoulder. "Pretty much what I expected," she muttered reproachfully. I wondered what answers she didn't like, but since Beth seemed to disapprove of men in general, it was hard to tell. In any case, when I reached the bottom of the screen and pressed enter, I suddenly realized I was done. The next requirement was a photo. I didn't have any photos with me, but Beth hid in her room and came back with a digital camera. She fixed my hair a little, adjusted a few lampshades to improve the lighting, and took several pictures. While she was reviewing her work, I tried to peek over her shoulder, but she waved me away. "Well?" I asked. "How do I look?" "Almost human," she said curtly. Nevertheless, she uploaded one of the photos to my computer, and after looking at it, I decided it wasn't too bad. I then downloaded it to add to my eye contact profile. A window popped up with instructions telling me to save my profile. When I looked at it in confusion, Mickey said, "That way you can review your answers in the future and make changes if you want." That made sense, so I saved a copy to my hard drive. "What now?" I asked. "Just wait," Mickey advised. "This will be interesting." A minute or two later, the profiles of 3 women suddenly appeared on the screen. Each had a headshot and a brief description below it. My eyes widened. All 3 women were very attractive, and a quick glance at their profiles suggested that they would be interesting to meet. At the bottom of the screen, I was asked to look at each woman's profile and then rate them on several criteria, including appearance, common interests, and overall attractiveness. I clicked on the first one. This was going to be fun. As I was rating them, I heard Mickey and Beth whispering behind me. I also heard a few giggles. When I had filled out all 3 profiles, a prompt appeared on the screen asking me to rate each woman in terms of her suitability for a date. "Tell us which of these women you would like to go on a date with." Damn, I thought. All 3 look way better than most of the women I've dated lately. But I looked at each one carefully to make sure I was sure of my preferences. When I finally ranked them 1, 2, 3, I heard Beth's voice behind me. "I told you so, pay up, jerk." Mickey rummaged in his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill, which he reluctantly handed to her. "How do you do that?" he asked her. "You're not just gay. You're not even the right gender." Beth just smiled calmly. While this little interaction was going on, I kept my eyes glued to the screen to see what would happen next, but nothing happened. I turned back to Mickey. "So here's the thing. How do I get in touch with her? When will I get her number?" I asked. "You won't," he said with a smirk. "They're just models. They're not real." Before I had time to get upset, Mickey directed my gaze back to the monitor. A message for me appeared on the screen. "Thank you for passing the initial screening. Within 24 hours, Eye Contact will provide you with profiles of 3 users who best match your tastes and interests based on the information you provided. However, this time you will receive the contact information for all 3 users. You can contact any of them, all of them, or none of them, as you wish. Eye Contact will continue to update and refine your profile based on your preferences to find your perfect match. Thank you for choosing Eye Contact." "That's it?" I asked, turning my chair toward Mickey. "No lists? No photo galleries? I'm just going to wait around until someone picks me?" "Yes, that's right," he said, folding his arms. "That's all you need. But wait. I think you'll be in high demand by tomorrow." By tomorrow, I thought to myself. I'll be kicking myself for letting Mickey talk me into this scam. But he had already returned to the living room and was watching TV. And I turned questioningly to Beth. She just smiled indulgently at me as if I were a child. "Be patient, Pity," she said. "Just be patient." The next morning, I went to work as usual, but I couldn't stop thinking about Eye Contact. Part of me kept wondering if it was just a clever scam to get free money out of me. But another part of me couldn't wait to see who the system would find for me. I desperately wanted to log into Eye Contact at the office and see who was waiting for me. But Google carefully monitors all network connections made from its virtual private network and does not recommend using personal information. Of course, I was well aware of the company's security capabilities, so I wasn't going to take any chances. I would have to wait until I got home. When I got home, Beth and Mickey were already there, and they must have known what I was thinking because they both followed me to my desk when I turned on my computer and logged into Eye Contact. I should have been angry at their curiosity, but since they already knew everything I was doing, I decided that one more invasion of my privacy wouldn't make a difference. The welcome screen read, "Good evening, Peter. Welcome to Eye Contact." Very cool, I thought, to set up a greeting based on the system clock. "We have 3 suggestions for you." The first one was a red-haired girl with a very pretty face. Judging by her profile, she worked as a copywriter at an advertising agency on Madison Avenue. Very cute, I thought. She seems like she'd be fun to meet. I clicked on the second option and saw a tall brunette photographed in front of an oil painting. As expected, her profile said she worked at a trendy art gallery in the village. I imagined Sunday trips to museums with her and long conversations over dinner in cozy restaurants. Definitely attractive. Damn, I thought, that's cool. Both options look very promising. Then I clicked on the third one, and oh my god, look at her. Only her face was visible in the photo, but what a face. Black hair fell over her shoulders, framing her dark eyes and high cheekbones. She must be a model, I thought. I quickly looked at her profile and learned that she was actually an investment banker. Her interests and preferred professions were similar to mine. I found out she was a year older than me, but that wasn't a problem, especially when I looked at her photo again. Beth leaned against my shoulder and I heard her sigh. Damn, she muttered. I wish I had that. I grabbed the mouse and hovered over the button with her contact information, but Mickey reached over and stopped me. Hey, slow down, cowboy. Are you sure you want to pick her for your first time? No offense, man, but I don't think she's right for you. For the first time since I'd met him, I lashed out at Mickey. Get off me, dude. You're the one who pushed me to sign up for this service. If eye contact thinks we're a good match, I'm going to stick with the plan. He raised his hands in encouragement. Sure, Peter. No problem. I just don't want you to get burned. I clicked on the contact information and saw her name, Susan Devereaux, along with her cell phone number and email address. I started to click on the latter, but this time Beth intervened. Wait, Peter, you're not going to send her an email, are you? Well, I said a little sheepishly, I thought it would be a nice, non-aggressive way to introduce myself. Beth snorted. Like that's going to impress her. A letter from some guy she's never heard of. You might as well write, Hi, my name is Peter and I'm a jerk. Okay, I said irritably. What would you do? First, she said, I'd call her. At least that way she'd know you're a real person and not some Viagra salesman. And if she agrees to meet you, what are you going to say? Beth continued. Well, I stammered, I'd probably ask her out to dinner on Saturday. No, 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 Beth scolded me. First of all, a girl like that almost certainly has plans for Saturday night. You don't want to be rejected on the first call, and if she doesn't have plans, you shouldn't make her admit it. That's not nice either. Okay, then what should I do? I asked in desperation. Call her and ask if she'll be in town next Monday. If she's traveling, she'll probably be away until the middle of the week, so she'll probably be free on Monday. And if she's not going, at least she'll be impressed how that you asked. And then? I asked. Then ask her if there's somewhere near her office where you could meet after work, have a drink, and get to know each other better. But I'm trying to stay away from bars, I objected. Just shut up and listen, she said, but smiled slightly so I wouldn't misunderstand her. First, by letting her choose the place, you'll make her feel more secure. She'll be on her turf, not yours. Second, if you turn out to be a complete failure, it will be easy for her to leave by going back to the office or going home. By giving her an easy way out, you'll lower her anxiety level about you. That makes sense, I thought. Third, Beth continued, if you do end up in a relationship, you'll still be somewhere she likes, and drinks can turn into dinner if she wants them to. Damn, I said admiringly. Are you sure you're not a natural, Beth? You've thought this through so well. I've slept with enough guys, she said, pretending to polish her nails. Okay, I said, I give up. Now shut up and let me make the call. I grabbed my Droid phone, but before dialing, I entered Susan's name and number into my phone's address book. Not in a hurry, dude? Mickey asked. Good luck, I replied. Then I pressed call. I was pleasantly surprised when she actually answered. To be honest, I didn't think it would work. Hell, I wasn't even sure she was real. Her voice was low and husky, but very feminine. It perfectly matched her image. I introduced myself and started the conversation as Beth had advised. To my surprise, it worked. She agreed and suggested we meet downtown, not far from her office. I said I'd be there around 7, and after a brief conversation, we made plans. I stood up from my chair, turned around, and knelt down in front of Beth. Praise your infinite wisdom, goddess of dates, I said as solemnly as I could, trying not to laugh. She wasn't impressed. I'd like it a lot better if it were her instead of you. All Saturday, I thought about our meeting. I kept thinking about what to wear and rehearsing possible topics of conversation. In short, I was acting like a freshman on his first date. Come on, hang in there, I told myself several times. It's not like you've never done this before. but I had to admit that no date had ever intrigued me as much as this one. When Monday morning came, Mickey was already up and I went outside to make breakfast. As I headed for the door, he stopped me. "Listen, man, just relax and be yourself. Everything will be fine." On the way to the subway station, I laughed to myself. Just be yourself. Pretty ironic advice from a guy who likes to dress like a woman. But I knew he was right. If only I could follow his advice. Throughout the day, I came up with dozens of scenarios that would prevent me from getting to the place Susan had suggested, but none of them worked, and at 7 o'clock the taxi took me there. I entered the quiet, cozy establishment and looked around for Susan. She was nowhere to be seen. Oh no. I sat down at the bar and prepared myself for her not to show up. But as soon as I ordered a drink, someone grabbed my arm. "Peter?" she said. And there she was, looking even better in real life than in her photo. The rest of her body was perfectly proportioned to her face. She was tall and slender with long legs and high heels. "Thanks, eye contact," I thought to myself. We introduced ourselves and she pulled me by the hand. "Let's go sit in a quiet corner where we can talk and get to know each other better." From that moment on, the conversation flowed and didn't stop. I didn't have time to feel nervous because I was too absorbed in what she was saying and sharing my thoughts. When there was finally a pause in the conversation, I realized it was already 8:30. "I didn't notice the time fly by," I said. "Would you like to order dinner so we can continue our conversation?" "Oh, I was hoping you'd suggest that," she replied immediately. I silently thanked Beth. We ordered a light dinner and continued talking as if we had known each other for years. She was interesting, funny, she was everything I was looking for. I wasn't sure what impression I had made on her, but at least she hadn't left. I was a little upset when I looked at my watch and saw that it was already 11 o'clock. I apologized for coping her out so late on a weeknight and offered to call her a taxi. We stepped out onto the sidewalk, and I hailed a cab. As I opened the door for her, she stopped me. "You're very different from the men I usually date," she said. "In a good way or a bad way?" I asked cautiously. "In a good way," she replied with a smile. I decided to take a chance. "Good enough that you'd like to do it again sometime?" I asked. "Of course," she replied. "Call me next week." With that, she kissed me on the cheek and slipped into a taxi, the stockings on her long legs glistening in the streetlights. I got home around midnight, but I don't remember how I got there. Maybe I took a taxi, or maybe I just flew through the air. What a wonderful evening. With incredible restraint, I waited until Monday rather than Sunday to call her. But as soon as I heard her husky voice on the phone, I lost my nerve again. "Hi," I said. "Do you still want to meet up this week?" And immediately I mentally kicked myself. That doesn't sound decisive or confident, I thought. "Sure," she replied. "Let's do it." I thought I detected a hint of hesitation in her voice. Nevertheless, she didn't refuse. "What day works for you?" I asked. I mentally slapped myself again. "What day is convenient for you?" "Just tell her you don't have any plans." "Friday is fine," she replied. "Great," I said a little too enthusiastically. Then I finally gave in to recklessness. "Is there anything you particularly like to do?" As soon as the words left my lips, I knew I had failed. How embarrassing, I thought to myself. We've only been out once, and I'm already out of ideas. She'll want to cancel the date without even meeting me. I thought I heard a hint of impatience in her voice, but maybe it was just my imagination. All she said was, "Surprise me." "I can do that," I said with much more confidence than I actually felt. And after a few more minutes of conversation, we parted ways. When I looked up, Mickey was staring at me strangely. You're sweating, Peter," he said in a concerned voice. I shook my head sadly. "I messed up, Mickey. I had a great chance and I think I blew it. How can I surprise such a sophisticated, intelligent woman like her?" With that, I told him the whole sad story, including the need to come up with something creative and amazing. As a good friend, he sat down next to me and tried to think of something, but nothing came to mind. But deep down, a little voice told me, "This is your only chance. It's all or nothing." And at that moment, I decided that if I was going to fail, I was going to fail big. Then it hit me, and I turned to my huge friend. "Mickey, you have to help me." He listened to my request and a big smile spread across his face. "Okay, Peter, I'll do it. It'll be fun. I can't promise it'll work, but I can promise she won't forget you." I decided that was all I could ask for. On Thursday, I called Susan again to remind her about our date. "Let's meet at your office," I told her, "and we'll go from there." "Where are we going?" she asked. "It's a surprise," I replied. "Remember?" The next evening, Susan left the office around 6:30, and I met her in the lobby. After quickly kissing her on the cheek, I walked her to the sidewalk and then hailed a taxi. As soon as we sat down, I leaned back in my seat and said to the taxi driver, "Grand Central Station." Susan looked at me strangely. I just smiled at her. When we arrived, I led her through the main lobby and up the stairs to the mezzanine. We found some chairs with a view of the conference hall and sat down. After sitting there for a minute or two, Susan couldn't hold back any longer. "What are we doing, Peter?" I glanced at the big clock below us, then smiled at her. "The people watching," I said. "Don't you like people watching?" She stared at me. "Well, yes," she agreed, "but take that guy, for example," I interrupted, pointing to a tall man in a felt hat and a long coat that almost reached the floor. He was walking toward us, and when he was almost there, suddenly stopped. As the crowd around him continued to pass by, he took off his backpack and placed it on the floor. Opening the top of the backpack, he reached inside and began rummaging through its contents. Suddenly, a beat filled the room. Then we heard Lady Gaga's voice singing. "When I was little, my mom told me, we were all born superstars." She curled my hair and painted my lips. In a glass in her boudoir. As soon as the words were spoken, the stocky figure suddenly straightened to its full height, threw off its coat and hat, revealing a platinum wig and a silver lamb dress tucked into high-heeled shoes. Despite the bright red lipstick and false eyelashes, there was no doubt that this incredibly tall blonde was a man. It was Mickey. He began to dance to the music, somehow maintaining perfect synchronization despite his 10-centimeter heels. "Ooh, I can't be any other way, baby. I was born this way." We saw many passers-by stop and stare at Mickey. Suddenly, in one coordinated movement, about 20 of them threw off their coats, revealing identical costumes. Then they headed toward him and began dancing around him, singing along to the music. The song transitioned into spoken words, and Mickey began spinning around, pointing his finger at the crowd. "Don't be a nerd. Be a queen. Don't be a drag queen. Be a queen." Everyone in Congress laughed as they watched the giant transvestite sing and dance. I risked a glance at Susan. She was laughing so hard that tears were streaming down her cheeks. She was clapping her hands and singing along. When the song ended, the dancers dispersed and began to mingle with the crowd, leaving Mickey alone. When the last chorus began, he started climbing the stairs toward us, singing, "I was born this way. I was born this way. I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way." He reached us just as he finished the last line, plopped down on my lap, and kissed me on the cheek. For a moment, there was dead silence, and then the hall erupted in applause and cheers. Mickey stood up and bowed to the audience as best he could in his tight dress, then turned to us. "Susan," I said, "meet my friend Mickey." "Mickey, this is Susan." Jimmy leaned over to kiss her on the cheek. "Well, how was it?" he asked her. "It was amazing," she replied. "At first, I couldn't understand what was happening, and then I couldn't believe it was really happening. I've never seen a flash mob live before. What a thrill." After that, we went to Mickey's club, where we ate, drank, and watched the performances. Susan had never been there before and loved it. She was charmed by Mickey and thought his friends were nice. She laughed and smiled the whole time. When we were ready to leave, she put me in a taxi and gave the driver an address on the Upper West Side. When we arrived, she almost ran to her door, unlocked it, and pulled me inside. There must have been other people in the apartment, but I didn't have time to see or say hello to them because she dragged me into the bedroom and closed the door behind us. We collapsed onto the bed and lay down on it. The next morning, after we got dressed, she took me to the kitchen, where her roommates were making a late breakfast. I felt a little awkward. They couldn't possibly not hear us. But Susan casually introduced me to Missy and Brianna, who seemed completely unconcerned by my presence. After we ate, it was time for me to go. Susan rode down with me in the elevator and stayed on the sidewalk while the doorman hailed a taxi. She kissed me goodbye, then looked intently into my eyes. "Last night was wonderful, the whole thing. Call me." I promised her I would without hesitation. As I got into the taxi, she leaned toward me and said, "Surprise me again." Then she turned to go back into the house, and the taxi drove off into the stream of traffic. That was the beginning of our romance. The intervals between our meetings quickly shortened, and soon the only interruptions were my trips to Mountain View and her trips to Boston. The degree to which our interests and tastes coincided was truly remarkable. I even considered writing a review for Eye Contact. If there was a downside to our relationship, it was the feeling of self-deprecation I felt because I had to keep finding new experiences to surprise Susan. She loved it and always looked forward to the next one. I tried to keep our dates interesting. Once I took her to Fort Tryon Park on the Hudson River to see the cloisters. Everyone who lives in New York goes to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but surprisingly few people visit the cloisters, which is a branch of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She likes the art in the museum, but she loves walking through the gardens and colonnades even more. She thinks it's a magical place. Another time, I surprised her by taking her on a Manhattan cruise on the Circle Line. She had never done that before and really enjoyed playing tourist. I think we were the only English speakers on board that day. Beth helped me get tickets to an avant-garde dance performance. The music was very strange, and I didn't understand what the dances meant, but Susan really liked it, and I earned big points for taking her with me. Over time, I started spending more and more time at Susan's apartment. In fact, we started living together. Her roommates got so used to me being there that they hardly paid any attention to me. Sometimes, though, I heard them making snide remarks when they thought I wasn't around. Of course, I took Susan to my place in Brooklyn, but she didn't feel comfortable there. I could understand that. Her apartment was much nicer and more comfortable. But I also felt that she and Beth didn't get along. There was nothing hostile about it, but it seemed that they had never really gotten along. I wondered if Susan didn't like Beth because she was a lesbian, or if Beth didn't like Susan because she was disappointed that Susan was heterosexual. Hamptons. On Friday afternoon, we rented a car and drove to the Hamptons to spend the weekend with her parents. As we pulled onto the Long Island Expressway, I grew increasingly nervous. I knew Susan's parents were quite wealthy, and I wondered what they would think of me. My nervousness didn't subside when Susan told me to turn onto a paved driveway that led to an oval bend in front of what could only be called a mansion. I was fully prepared to see Jay Gatsby come out the door. "Mom, Dad, we're here," Susan called as I dragged our bags into the foyer. Mr. and Mrs. Devereaux came out of the back room at her voice and greeted their daughter warmly, then shook my hand. Mrs. Devereaux, please call me Elaine, was a tall, attractive woman, although she had clearly gained weight and undergone several plastic surgeries. She took my hands easily and kissed me on the cheek. I tried not to touch her face. Walter Devereaux was stocky, but apparently had been that way all his life. His thinning hair was combed back and gray, giving him the appearance of a respectable man. Although he was over 60, his handshake was firm. The trip was long, and since we stopped along the way to eat, it was quite late by the time we arrived. After a brief conversation, we were shown upstairs to our bedrooms. Susan went to her old room, and I was shown to the guest bedroom. Miss Devereaux informed us that breakfast would be served at 8 o'clock in the sunroom, then wished us good night. Susan giggled, waved her hand, and disappeared into her room. I was getting ready for bed, wondering what the next day would bring. I hadn't turned off the light when the bedroom door opened and Susan slipped into the room. She was wearing a nightgown. She pulled back the covers and lay down next to me. "Should we do it?" I asked anxiously. "What if—" No more words were spoken, and it didn't take much imagination to guess what happened next. When I woke up the next morning, I was alone in bed. Looking at the clock, I saw that it was already 7:30, so I hurriedly got up, took a shower, and shaved, mindful of Mrs. Devereaux's breakfast schedule. At 5 minutes to 8, I found myself in the sunroom, a large room with glass walls overlooking the pool. "Glad you could join us," said Mr. Devereaux, and I wasn't sure if he was welcoming me or reproaching me for being late. Over breakfast, which I thought would be enough for two, Walter told us about his plans for the day. "I thought we could have lunch by the pool today. Then we'll take a drive around the neighborhood so Susan can see how everything has changed. And in the evening, we'll have dinner at the club." I was disappointed. Of course, I had nothing else to do, but I had hoped to spend some time alone with Susan. However, it looked like that wasn't going to happen this weekend. After a leisurely breakfast, Walter and Elaine gave us a tour of the house and grounds. When we arrived last night, I immediately realized that the house was huge. But as we walked through the long hallways and enormous rooms, I was stunned. Their dining room alone was bigger than my entire apartment in Brooklyn. If they walk around this house regularly, I thought, How can they gain weight? After the tour, we all went back to our rooms to change. I pulled on some old shorts and a t-shirt, then walked barefoot across the lush grass to the pool. This time, only Walter beat me there. He was shirtless, his belly hanging over his swimming trunks. He settled down in the shade under a canopy, holding a large jug under his arm, which I assumed contained whiskey and soda. Then the ladies appeared. Elaine in a one-piece swimsuit that hid her extra weight, and Susan in a bikini that could turn on even the dead. I was a little surprised that she had chosen such a daring outfit to appear in front of her parents, but they just smiled indulgently at their daughter and made themselves comfortable. It soon became clear that the pool and solarium were reserved for the ladies. While they sunbathed, Walter and I stayed under the awning, sipping whiskey and juice. He was already finishing his second drink, and I was only on my first. While we were relaxing, he started talking about the current political situation. I was a guest, and I like to think a fairly intelligent person, so I kept my mouth shut and just listened. Politically, I consider myself a moderate, perhaps a little to the right of center. Listening to Walter, I realized that he was somewhere to the right of Genghis Khan. He talked at length about what was wrong with the country and what needed to be done to fix it. I just sat there silently while he ranted, occasionally biting my tongue to keep from betraying my indignation at some of his statements. At one point, I imagined how Mickey and Beth would see him, and I had to fight back laughter at the thought of this unlikely scene. Due to the warm sun and more alcohol than I usually drink, I felt myself starting to doze off. Apparently, I wasn't the only one, because after we snacked on the canapes I had brought with me, we all went into the house to take a nap. I planned to sleep for just a few minutes, but when I woke up, I was surprised to find that it was already midday. When I got dressed and went downstairs, Walter, who seemed completely unaffected by the scammers, sat us in his Jaguar XJ and started showing us around the neighborhood. Most of the conversation was directed at Susan. Mom and Dad were eagerly pointing out everything that had changed since she moved to Manhattan. As for me, I was content to admire the mansions overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. They looked like they had cost a pretty penny. By the time we returned to the Devereaux house, it was almost time for dinner. I was told that the dress code was casual, but I already guessed that casual didn't mean what I wore in Brooklyn. So I put on slacks and a knit shirt with a sports jacket thrown over it. I felt comfortable until I stepped into the foyer and saw Elaine and Susan in cocktail dresses that, in my opinion, would have been appropriate for an Oscar ceremony. I was starting to panic, thinking I was going to embarrass myself and Susan, when Walter appeared. He was dressed even more casually than I was. He hadn't even bothered to put on socks. I breathed a huge sigh of relief, and when we arrived at the club, it quickly became clear that such a difference in dress was the norm. All the women were dressed up to impress each other, while the men were wearing the most casual clothes their wives would let them wear. However, I noticed that the logos on the men's clothes belonged exclusively to expensive brands. Dinner was excellent, but the conversation was not. Susan's mother mostly talked about people and families I didn't know. Walter's conversation consisted of pointing out men at other tables and telling me how they made their fortunes. I recognized a few names from the Wall Street Journal, but after a while it became difficult to keep up with his litany of luxury. The only relief came when Susan turned away from her mother for a moment and winked at me. When we got home, Walter insisted that I join him in the library for a brandy after dinner. Settling into large leather armchairs, he began to ask me about my background and upbringing. "So you're from Tennessee," he said. "Did you grow up on the farm?" I smiled involuntarily. "Well, my great-grandfather had a farm, but we've lived in the city for a long time." "I see," he said. "And what did your father do?" "He was a lawyer," I replied. Of course, of course. In a musical town, he must have done a lot of copyright work. Music, song lyrics, recording contracts, and the like," Walter mused aloud. I loved my father and was proud of him and his achievements. "Not really," I replied firmly. "Most of his work was in constitutional law. He even argued a few cases before the Supreme Court." "The Tennessee Supreme Court?" he asked. "No," I replied. "The other one." After that, the conversation seemed to freeze. I don't know if Walter didn't believe me or if he just didn't care. The next day, I breathed a sigh of relief when Susan and I were finally able to get into our rental car and head back to Manhattan. I felt as if I had been in court the whole time and lost the case. As I drove, thinking back on the weekend's events, Susan started laughing. "You should see your face right now. You look like you just got back from the dentist." Even I couldn't help but smile. But I wasn't ready to forgive and forget just yet. Well, you'd look like that too if you spent the whole weekend at the dentist. Are they always like that? She smiled at me. Don't let them get to you. They just went a little overboard. You have to remember that I'm their only child. I looked at her curiously. We had never discussed her childhood. Well, what was it like growing up in a family like that? Actually, it was pretty fun. As far back as I can remember, they always wrapped me around their little finger. They had all these plans for me, piano lessons, ballet, exclusive girls' schools, and all that. But I didn't like any of it, so I just did what I wanted. They always did everything they could to help me and pretty much let me do whatever I wanted. They gave me everything I wanted. I was pretty spoiled, she said with a laugh. I remember they wanted to send me to some stupid boarding school for girls. But I didn't want to go, so I ran away during the first week and stayed with a guy from college whom I met at a party. They were very worried. And when I finally came home, they promised they would never force me to do anything I didn't want to do again. Then her face became more serious. For a while, I was kind of on the outside. But in my sophomore year, one of my best friends lost her father in a plane crash. Suddenly, all their money was gone, and she and her mother had to live with relatives. I realized that if something like that happened to me, I wouldn't be able to take care of myself. So I started taking my studies seriously and getting good grades. That's how I ended up at Wausau, and that's why I'm here now. Then she suddenly smiled mischievously. But I haven't changed completely. I still do what I want when I want. I was curious to learn a little more about Susan's background. I thought her story explained some of her personality traits. But I was still haunted by the exam session I had gone through that weekend, so I steered the conversation back to where I wanted it to be. I don't think I made a good impression on your parents that weekend. Oh, don't take it personally, she dismissed. They think no one is good enough for me. Then her eyes lit up. But my dad warned me to sign a prenuptial agreement with you. I sat there trying to process that last sentence. On the one hand, the implication that I was some kind of fortune hunter annoyed me. Hell, before that weekend, I didn't even know how rich they were. But then I realized that we hadn't even talked about marriage. Maybe Susan had said something to my father. Maybe she had hinted that she wanted me to propose. Suddenly, my heart started beating faster. I knew I was crazy about her, but I wasn't sure she felt the same way about me. Maybe this was a sign of her true feelings? I reached across the center console and held her hand, and we held hands all the way to Manhattan. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to find out how Susan felt about such a delicate matter as marriage because when I got back to work, I had to leave for the West Coast again. And as soon as I returned, she had already left for Boston for a few days. It was during one of her business trips that I decided to propose to her. Courage had already helped me once in my relationship with her, and I decided to use it again. One day during my lunch break, I went to my bank and opened my safe deposit box. Inside a velvet box lay an engagement ring and my grandmother's ring. She had entrusted them to my mother to give to me for my bride. Of course, my mother had no way of doing that, but after my parents died, I inherited the rings. I didn't know how much they were worth on the jewelry market today, but the sentimental value of the antique jewelry meant much more to me, and I hoped Susan felt the same way. Susan arrived from Boston late on Tuesday evening and was so tired that she just wanted to go to bed. But before she left, I made her promise that she would go on a date with me on Wednesday evening. "Do you have another surprise for me, baby?" she asked. "You'll have to wait and see," I replied calmly, even though my heart was beating like crazy. The next evening, I met her at the office and we took a taxi to one of her favorite restaurants for dinner. After dinner, we went dancing at a club we often went to. We had a good time, but I could tell Susan was a little disappointed. Deciding the time was right, I took her by the hand and pulled her toward the door. I hailed a taxi and asked the driver to take us to Fifth Avenue between 33rd and 34th Streets. On the way, Susan asked where we were going, but I just waved her off. The taxi stopped at the curb, and we found ourselves at the Empire State Building. I ignored Susan's questions again and led her to the elevators, where I took out 2 express tickets I had bought earlier. We rode up to the observation deck on the 102nd floor in silence. Susan was clearly waiting for an explanation, but I said nothing. We walked over to the railing and I invited her to come to the edge of the building. She looked out at the sea of lights below in lower Manhattan, then turned back to me. "Well, why did you want to—" Then she fell silent and held her breath when she saw me drop to one knee and hold out the open box to her. "Susan Devereaux, this is my grandmother's engagement ring. Will you make me the happiest man in the world by accepting it and becoming my wife?" She froze in shock. But then the kids from the camp and other vacationers noticed us and quickly picked up the chorus. Say yes, say yes. She looked around, then looked at me. Suddenly her eyes sparkled and she said, let's do it. Yes, let's do it. The crowd applauded, and after I put the ring on her finger, she hugged me and couldn't stop kissing me. After that, we had to go back to her apartment so she could tell her neighbors. Although it was well past midnight, she woke up the other two Miss Kidders to show them the ring and tell them about my proposal. The three of them hugged each other excitedly and whispered to each other, looking at me. I hesitated for a moment, but then Missy and Brianna rushed over to hug and congratulate me. When all the excitement had died down, Susan and I retired to her bedroom. She hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "Oh, Peter, that was the best surprise of my life. So corny. I never would have guessed." "I'm so glad you're happy, baby," I told her. "Tomorrow, we can start discussing wedding plans and—" "No," Susan said firmly. "I don't want to wait. No fancy wedding in the Hamptons, no engraved invitations, no parties. Tomorrow. Let's go to City Hall tomorrow and get married." "But your parents," I objected. "No," she repeated. "I want to do it now. It'll be great, Peter. Engagement today, wedding tomorrow. It's perfect. Don't worry about my parents. They'll survive." So there we were on Thursday afternoon at the Marriage Bureau in Manhattan. Of course, we learned that in order to get married in New York, you have to stand in line and fill out a bunch of paperwork. Although now there are computerized kiosks that simplify the process. After answering all the questions and paying $35, we learned about the mandatory 24-hour waiting period. But that didn't dampen Susan's enthusiasm in the slightest. "That's even better," she said. "We can get married tomorrow afternoon, and Missy and Brianna can come and be my bridesmaids." Now she was determined, and there was no stopping her. To be honest, I didn't mind at all. I would have been happy to take part in any ceremony that would make Susan happy, but if she was willing to forego a formal wedding, so much the better. I didn't have any close relatives who would be offended by not being invited to my wedding, and I knew my friends would be just as happy reading about it on Facebook. But I made a point of calling Mickey and Beth, and they both promised to come. So on Friday afternoon, I took the day off work, went to the marriage bureau in my best suit and tie, and took Mickey and Beth with me as witnesses. We arrived a few minutes early, and I enjoyed watching Susan take the stage. It was obvious she wasn't sticking to tradition. She was wearing a black dress instead of a white one, and a large hat pulled down over one eye. Brianna and Missy stood on either side of her, both wearing identical white dresses. I never figured out how they managed to coordinate their outfits, but it seemed to me, and probably to many other viewers, that the three of them could have starred not only in a music video, but also in a wedding film. The ceremony itself was very short. After all, the clerk had a schedule to keep. After we solemnly promised to leave everyone else behind, I kissed my new bride, and it was done. I heard a loud pop and saw that Beth was holding the bottle of champagne she had brought with her. I was surprised to see tears in her eyes, but I guess all women cry at weddings, even lesbians. We had to leave to allow the next couple to get married, so we stepped out into the hallway. No one had thought to bring champagne glasses, so we just drank from the bottle as we celebrated. When the excitement died down, Mickey came in with the keys to the zip car he had picked up for me. We all went out to Worth Street, where the car was parked illegally, and I helped my new wife get in. As we pulled away from the curb, Susan casually tossed the bouquet out the window into Beth's surprised hands. "I guess it's one of those old superstitions that doesn't come true," I laughed. Niagara Falls. As I drove west toward the Holland Tunnel, Susan turned to me in her seat. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Just wait," I told her. "It's another surprise." I had already told her to pack a suitcase for a short honeymoon, but I hadn't told her where we were going. I was determined to surprise her again, as she loves surprises. We drove north on Interstate 81 and reached Syracuse, then turned west onto Interstate 90. It wasn't until we reached Buffalo that Susan realized where we were going. "Oh my God," she said, bursting out laughing. "We're going to spend our honeymoon at Niagara Falls." She was right. It seemed to me that the only way to top a marriage proposal at the top of the Empire State Building was a honeymoon, in the self-proclaimed honeymoon capital of the world. Susan loved the idea. She couldn't wait to tell Missy and Brianna where we were going, but she was even more excited when she found out where we were staying. I went online to find the perfect place and was sure I had found it. When we pulled up to the heart-shaped neon sign that read "Romance Getaway," she laughed out loud, and when the fat concierge opened the door to our room, She could hardly contain herself. It was a honeymoon suite with a jacuzzi and a huge heart-shaped bed covered with pink satin sheets. "It's perfect," she exclaimed. "Just perfect." Despite the long weekend, we had a wonderful honeymoon. We got out of that ridiculous bed to see Niagara Falls and Horseshoe Falls, and even got wet riding through the mist on the Maid of the Mist. Although Niagara Falls is dirty and overly commercialized, the area around Lake Ontario is beautiful, and we enjoyed driving through the countryside. Manhattan. We were tired but happy with our long trip back to Manhattan. Back at the apartment, we unpacked and fell into bed. After a long honeymoon, sleep was the only thing on our minds. "Good night, Mrs. Morrison," I whispered, pulling her head close to me. "Thank you, honey." "What a wonderful surprise," she murmured as she drifted off to sleep. When we woke up the next morning, Missy and Brianna had already left for work. I had taken an extra day off work so that I could not only rest, but also move my clothes and other things. As I arranged my things around the apartment, I thought it was the right moment to broach a delicate subject with Susan. "When are Missy and Brianna planning to move out?" I asked. "Why would they move out?" she asked. "Well," I hesitated. "You know, now that we're married, I just thought they—" "Oh, no," she said. "I can't ask them to leave." "Where would they go?" I didn't know what to say. "But wouldn't they like it if we all lived here together?" I asked, trying to find a convincing argument. "No," she said. "We've been living together for several months now, and there are no problems. Besides, the three of us were in college together. We can't stop now." I didn't like her answer, but I decided to keep quiet. It was clear to me that, although Susan loved thrills and surprises, she didn't particularly like change. I hoped that she would change her mind over time, or that we would move and the problem would resolve itself. The idea of two Nubian women living in a New York apartment with my wife might have seemed like a teenager's dream, but the reality was quite different. In fact, they both acted as if I wasn't there. I don't mean they were rude or hostile, they just lived their normal lives as if nothing had changed. They often walked around the apartment in their underwear, and although I liked it, they didn't show any seductive intentions. Rather, I was like a new piece of furniture that they quickly got used to. We had intimate conversations during meals, but the rest of the time they hardly noticed me, only occasionally whispering and giggling to each other. I noticed that this often happened the morning after Susan and I had made loud love. I expected her parents to be upset when they found out what we were doing, but Susan didn't care. I listened as she called them in the evening when we got back. "Mom, guess what I did this weekend?" she said casually. Halfway through the conversation, it was clear that Mom and Dad weren't thrilled, but Susan didn't give up. Half an hour later, she hung up, saying, "I love you too, Mom." "Well," I asked, "how did they take it?" "They were upset," she admitted, "but they'll get over it. They'll never stop being mad at me." As the weeks and months passed, Susan and I quickly settled into our new life together. Truth be told, our daily routine wasn't much different from before. Only our family status had changed. I still flew to the West Coast frequently, but now my status at work had changed. I was promoted to head of network security and was happy with my career. I tried to keep in touch with Mickey and Beth, although I didn't see them as often as I used to. At least I was able to help them move. One of my coworkers was looking for an apartment, and I recommended my old place to him. He moved in a week after I left, so Mickey and Beth didn't suffer any financial loss from my sudden departure. If there was anything that caused me stress, it was my desire to make my fiancée happy and cheerful. As you can imagine, it's not easy to constantly come up with new and unexpected ways to entertain someone. Our busy work and travel schedules didn't help, and the gaps between surprises inevitably grew longer. Nevertheless, when I did manage to come up with something, Susan enjoyed it almost physically. My little surprises clearly appealed to her impulsive nature, and the pleasure she got from them encouraged me to keep going. Our wedding anniversary was approaching, and I naturally wanted to do something special and unique to celebrate, but coming up with something suitable was not easy. I was returning from the coast on a night flight, and since I cannot sleep on planes, I used the time to think about how I could surprise Susan. The fact that she was expecting something made the task even more difficult. My flight was delayed due to a severe storm over the central United States, so I didn't arrive at John F. Kennedy Airport until the next morning. I was completely exhausted, so I called the office and said I was taking the day off. When I got to the apartment, no one was there. All three girls had already left for work. I threw my bags on the floor and collapsed on the bed. But despite my exhaustion, my internal clock wouldn't let me sleep, and I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, still trying to think of something to surprise Susan with. Suddenly, an idea came to me. Eager to try it out, I started to take my laptop out of my bag when I noticed that Susan had left her computer on. She usually turns it off carefully after work, but this morning, before leaving, she must have been checking something and forgotten to do so. I clicked the mouse, and the screensaver disappeared, revealing the Google News window. There she is, my faithful wife, I thought. I switched to Google search, but the search didn't turn up anything useful. Without thinking, I clicked the close button. Suddenly, I found myself looking at another window that Susan had left open. At the top of the screen, a familiar logo caught my eye. Eye contact. I wondered why Susan had visited the Eye Contact website. Under the Eye Contact banner was a field with the following text. Thank you for renewing your annual membership with Eye Contact. We look forward to presenting you with new and exciting offers that match your interests and desires. I froze. It couldn't mean what I thought it meant. She wasn't looking for other men, was she? I quickly opened her trash folder to see what I could find. It was empty. Susan must have cleared it recently, possibly even this morning. I returned to her browser and clicked the Show All Downloads button. As expected, the screen was blank. If there had been any downloads, she had clearly moved them to the shopping cart and then emptied it. But I knew Google Chrome well and knew that clicking the Clear All button didn't actually delete downloads. So I went back and opened the Downloads folder in Windows, and was shocked. It was filled with profiles from Eye Contact. Dozens of these profiles had been downloaded. I displayed them in chronological order. A quick glance showed that a new profile appeared about every 2 weeks. I switched to viewing file names, and the profiles were sorted alphabetically. As expected, Morrison was listed under the letter M. I clicked on it and saw the photo Beth had taken of me almost a year ago. I went back to looking at the dates. The earliest profiles had been created before we even met. To my horror, the most recent one was dated yesterday. I opened it, and a handsome red-haired stranger stared back at me. I was about to close the form when I noticed that this person didn't live in New York, but in Boston. Susan was supposed to fly to Boston tomorrow. Part of me urged me to stay calm. There had to be some innocent explanation, some reason why this didn't mean that what the other part of me, the part that was sick and tormented, feared was true, that my beautiful fiancé was seeing other men. For a moment, I felt nauseous. My stomach twisted, and if I really needed to throw up, I wouldn't have made it to the bathroom because my legs were too weak. However, I gradually calmed down and my stomach settled. I regained my ability to think and began to consider what to do next. In my heart, I knew the answer, but I needed solid evidence that I could present to Susan. First, I took the flash drive out of my briefcase, copied all the profiles from Susan's Downloads folder, and transferred them to my laptop. Then I returned Susan's computer to the state it was in when I came home. After that, I turned on my computer and started looking for detective agencies. Finally, I tidied up the apartment so that there would be no traces of my presence. Once outside, I called the detective agency I had found. Yes, they told me, one of their employees would be happy to meet with me. When I arrived at the agency, I was somewhat disappointed. I had half expected to see a shabby, smoke-filled room where detectives with names like Spade and Archer worked. Instead, the reception area I entered looked like a law firm, and the detective who came out to meet me turned out to be a well-dressed woman. Despite her business-like appearance, Miss Martin was calm and professional, and I told her the whole story. She took detailed notes, and when I mentioned the last profile, she took my flash drive and copied the files to her computer. She also copied Susan's profile, which was still on my laptop. Finally, she looked up from her notes. So, Mr. Morrison, what exactly would you like us to find out for you? I had already made up my mind. For now, I just need to know what Susan is doing in Boston tomorrow evening. If my suspicions are correct, that will be enough. If not, we'll take it from there. She nodded. All right, we'll be able to give you a full report on her activities tomorrow afternoon. As I left the agency's office, I was impressed by their professionalism. I also liked that Miss Martin hadn't jumped to conclusions or tried to reassure me. Her approach was entirely businesslike. The facts spoke for themselves. From the lobby of the building, I called Susan and was grateful when I heard her voicemail. Hi, babe. Just wanted to let you know I'm stuck in Mountain View for a couple more days. Hope you get to Boston safely. See you Friday afternoon. Love you. The last lie didn't come easily. Then I called again. Mickey, can I come over? I don't know what my face looked like, but when Mickey and Beth saw me, they sat me down on the couch and Beth hugged me to comfort me. Then I poured out everything that was in my heart, what I had discovered, what I was afraid of, and what I had done. Mickey was horrified and couldn't believe it, and Beth just shook her head. I knew she had never really loved Susan, and looking back, I think she was right. We discussed all the possible options and made a plan before they had to leave for work. Of course, everything depended on what the detective agency found. But while Mickey still had hope, Beth had no doubts, and unfortunately neither did I. It turned out that their other neighbor had left town, so I stayed the night in his bed. The next day, I got up and went to work as usual. It felt strange to walk down the old road and get on the same subway after such a long break. Early in the morning, Miss Martin from the detective agency called me. She said I could come by for the report after lunch if I wanted. I said I would be there at 3 o'clock sharp. As I rode the elevator after lunch, I felt mixed emotions. At one moment, I felt like a patient on his way to surgery. The next moment, I felt the wings of hope touching my face, urging me to believe that this was all just a silly misunderstanding on my part. I didn't have to wait long to find out which one was right. As soon as I sat down in Miss Martin's office, she took a report bound in one of those home covers out of her desk. Mr. Morrison, she said without preamble, I regret to inform you that your suspicions about your wife have been confirmed. Our agent in Boston followed your wife from the moment she got into the hotel elevator yesterday morning, throughout the entire workday, and then returned to the hotel after she left the office. I flipped through the report and saw a photo of Susan in the hotel lobby. She was wearing one of her business suits. The time on the photo was 6:30 p.m. The detective continued. She then went up to her room, apparently to freshen up and change. About an hour later, she returned to the lobby, where she was met by her date for the evening. I turned the page and saw Susan stepping out of the elevator in a backless dress. Too low cut for a business dinner, I thought grimly. Turning the next page, I saw her companion. It was the same red-haired man I had seen in the eye contact profile. He kissed her on the cheek in a friendly manner. The agent followed them to a restaurant where they had a few drinks and then dinner, Miss Martin continued. From there, they went to a nightclub where they had a few more drinks and danced for several hours. The photo on the next page was dark, obviously taken in poor lighting. Nevertheless, there was no doubt that it was Susan and Red dancing, and they had been captured in what looked like a kiss. After that, Miss Martin continued calmly, they took a taxi back to the hotel where they went to Susan's room. The photograph showed part of the elevator interior. Although the door was already closing, it was possible to make out the couple inside and recognize them. They were embracing, and I noticed that Red's hand had slipped under Susan's skirt. The time was indicated as 11:45 p.m. The next morning, said the detective, the lady's companion went down to the elevator alone and caught a taxi at around 7:30 a.m. Mrs. Morrison came down about an hour later. She checked out of the hotel and took a taxi back to her office. In the last photo, Susan, dressed in a women's business suit, was helping the hotel doorman into a taxi. I looked at the detective. So you have no real evidence of what happened in the room that night? I asked. She looked at me calmly. We work very thoroughly, Mr. Morrison. For a considerable fee, which you will find on the bill, we gained access to Mrs. Morrison's room while she was at work yesterday. We installed a spy camera with a motion sensor in the room. After Mrs. Morrison checked out this morning, we were able to retrieve it. At the end of the folder, you will find a disc with a recording of the events of that evening. I flipped through the booklet to the end and began to remove the disc from the sleeve, but Miss Martin reached across the table and stopped me. Mr. Morrison, we strongly advise our clients not to watch such videos. You already know what happened in the room, and this video will not add any new information. But it will create emotionally charged images that you will not be able to forget. Believe me, this is one of those cases where it is better to know a little than a lot. I jerked my hand away. I had to decide whether to watch the video later, but I felt the truth in her words. How much more did I want to suffer? We sat in silence for a minute, then she spoke. Mr. Morrison, after receiving confirmation of a spouse's infidelity, a surprisingly large percentage of our clients are willing to consider reconciliation. Do you think you could do that? I didn't need to think about the answer. Absolutely not. First of all, we haven't even been together a year, and she's already sleeping with other men. How could I forgive that? Second, this wasn't some sudden fling. She chose this guy and had an affair with him. And what's worse, I know damn well he wasn't the only one. There were 37 profiles on her computer, and I'd bet she had fun with every one of them. Miss Martin didn't lose her composure. I understand, Mr. Morrison. I would feel the same way in your position. But I had to ask. She paused. Now, let me ask you another question. Do you have a lawyer? No, I shook my head. I don't think I'm ready for that yet. To tell the truth, I didn't even know a single lawyer. In that case, I would be happy to recommend a lawyer we have worked with many times in the past. He is honest and reasonable. Plus, he has the advantage of being in the same building. I figured the detective agency probably got some kind of commission or fee for every client they referred to a lawyer, but honestly, I didn't care. I was on a mission, and I needed to hurry. Can you set up an appointment for me today? I asked. In the evening, I returned to Brooklyn with a personal file in an envelope and my new lawyer's business card. When I got to the apartment, Mickey was already gone, but Beth was off for the weekend and could listen to all the details. As for the disc, I still couldn't decide whether to watch it or not. Beth surprised me. She offered to watch it first and then advise me. She disappeared into her room, closing the door behind her. I had time to wash up and change into jeans and a t-shirt when she returned. I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. She hugged me and said quietly, "Don't watch it. I can see how much it hurts you. It will only make things worse." I decided to follow her advice. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and now it was important for me to focus on the details and get everything right. I didn't want anything to distract me. When Mickey returned, the three of us talked a little more about what I was going to do. I would have to rely on the two of them to make sure everything was organized and all the details were taken care of. But they were already talking about it as if it were their plan, and I was just a fellow traveler. They seemed to take what had happened to me to heart, and that touched me deeply. Columbus Circle. On Friday afternoon, I returned to Susan's apartment with bags in my hands as if I had just arrived from the airport. When I opened the door and walked in, the three misses were sitting on the couch whispering and giggling. When I entered the room, Susan jumped up, ran across the room, and threw herself into my arms while Brianna and Missy giggled. "Oh, baby, I missed you so much," Susan exclaimed, kissing me passionately. Then she pulled away and looked at me slyly. "You know it's our anniversary this weekend, right?" she asked. "How could I forget?" I replied calmly. "And before you ask, yes, I have a surprise for you. But you'll have to wait until Sunday to get it." Susan was so excited that she was trembling. "Oh, I can't wait that long. Come on, baby, at least give me a hint. What are you up to?" "No," I replied firmly. "My lips are sealed. You'll have to wait." The rest of the evening passed normally, except that Susan whispered to Missy and Brianna the whole time while we relaxed in front of the TV. I guess they were either speculating about what Sunday would bring or comparing me to Red. Either way, I didn't pay any attention to them. When it was time for the bed, Susan wanted some fun, as she always did when one of us came back from a trip. But considering what I had learned about her activities in Boston, I decided I would never touch her again. So when she started rubbing up against me, I pushed her away firmly. "No, baby, not tonight. And not tomorrow. It's part of the surprise. You have to wait until Sunday." I think she was shocked by this turn of events, and I knew she was upset because she always waited for me when I came back from California. However, my desire to give her a big surprise hurt her feelings, and she eventually calmed down and fell into a restless sleep. Saturday turned out to be just as disappointing for her. She must have asked Missy and Brianna to get some kind of hint out of me, because whenever Susan wasn't around, one of them would offer to help with the surprise. But I calmly replied that everything was ready and no help was needed. Then I teased them even more by telling them they would be part of the surprise. This made them very excited, and when Susan returned, they couldn't wait to tell her about the new development. She, for her part, could hardly stand up acting like a little girl on Christmas Eve. That evening, I did nothing to give them any hint or pleasure. Instead of going out, I suggested ordering takeout, and not wanting to leave me alone to cook while they were out, they reluctantly stayed with me. When we were getting ready for bed, I sensed that the conflict inside Susan had reached a critical point. She was still eagerly awaiting the surprise. She tried her best to seduce me, but I remained adamant. Come on, Susan, you don't want to ruin the surprise." That stopped her, and she pouted and went to bed. The next morning, I realized that I had to tell them something or risk causing a riot, so I gave them some instructions at breakfast. I told them that we had to leave the apartment at exactly 12:30. No special clothes were required, no suitcases needed to be packed, and we would all take one taxi. After giving them all the details, I left them in tense contemplation, went downstairs, and stepped outside to quickly call Mickey. He assured me that everything was fine. Just be there on time, relax, and enjoy the show, he told me. At 12:30, I brought all three of them downstairs. The doorman found us a taxi, and I slipped him a $50 tip. He was surprised, but I liked the guy and figured I probably wouldn't see him again. The girls got in the back seat, and I got in the front next to the driver. That way, I could lean over and tell him where to go without the three miscatchers hearing. This caused a commotion, but I ignored it with a smile. Despite the traffic, we arrived at our destination a few minutes early. The girls got out of the taxi looking a little confused, staring at the imposing figure of Christopher Columbus towering above them. "Why are we on Columbus Avenue?" Brianna asked. 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 "Ask Brianna." He asked Brianna. "Is there going to be a surprise?" With a smile on my face, I led them to the foot of the statue and sat them down on the wide steps on one side. Columbus Circle was filled with tourists and passers-by, some taking pictures, others strolling around, enjoying the sunny weather. At that moment, a man approached the three girls from behind and placed a large object on the ledge above them. I recognized it. It was an old tape recorder. He pressed the button. Suddenly, a rhythmic drumbeat sounded from the speakers, startling the girls and attracting the attention of many people in the circle and beyond. As the drums continued to play, several passers-by began to gather in a circle surrounding the entire perimeter of the monument. I didn't hear any commands, but they suddenly began to dance as one, performing a modified version of the famous Rocket number from Radio City Music Hall. Then, to the beat of the drums, they moved on to the hit song, "The One That Got Away." I saw Susan clapping enthusiastically. Katy Perry was one of her favorite pop singers, and this song was one of her top 10 hits. As the dancers jumped and leapt in front of Susan, Missy, and Brianna, Katy's sweet voice sang the chorus, "In another life, I would be your girl. We would keep all our promises. We would stand against the world." The tourists applauded and cheered as the clearly spontaneous performance continued. The three girls sat smiling and laughing. I knew Susan was enjoying it. She had always loved being the center of attention. As the dancers continued to dance around the statue, one of them emerged from behind the girls carrying a poster with a photo of a man, which he first showed to the crowd and then to the girls. "Is that the one who ran away?" the crowd asked. Then another dancer appeared with a poster with a photo of another man, followed by another, and another, and another, and another. Susan laughed merrily at the spectacle, but Missy suddenly frowned, leaned over, and shouted in Brianna's ear, pointing to the photos spinning in front of them. Apparently, she recognized one of the dates Susan had arranged. In fact, all the faces the dancers were showing were profiles of Susan's beloved men. The next poster caused even more confusion among Susan's friends. Brianna began tugging at Susan and shouting, gesturing for her to look at the last poster. Suddenly, Susan looked up, realizing what Brianna was talking about. She began to move, trying to get a better look at all the pictures the dancers were carrying. Her excitement grew when she noticed the last picture. It was the red-haired man she had spent the night with in Boston earlier that week. As the song transitioned into the chorus, the group of dancers continued to dance and stomp, each holding a poster in plain sight. "All that money can't buy me a time machine, no. Can't replace you with a million rings, no. I should have told you what you mean to me, oh, because now I'm paying for it." At that moment, all the dancers dropped their posters on the ground. Mickey and Beth emerged from behind the statue, each holding a poster with a photo of Susan and me. When they approached the three girls, whose faces were pale even in the bright midday light, Katy Perry's voice rang out again in the chorus. "In another life, I would have made you stay. So you wouldn't have to say, you're the one who left. You're the one who ran away." As the chorus repeated, Mickey and Beth pulled on different parts of the poster, and it suddenly tore in two, separating my image from Susan's. Then they threw each half to the ground. The crowd was confused. The dancers stopped, and the performance seemed to be over, but the tape recorder was still playing the last line of the chorus, as if on an endless loop. And instead of the laughter they expected from the three girls who were clearly the center of attention, they were crying and hugging each other in obvious despair. A few people began to applaud. but they were drowned out by those around them who wanted to see what would happen next. When the last verse of the song began again, the circle of dancers parted and I quickly stepped forward. I approached Susan, and when she looked up at me with tears streaming down her face, I handed her a copy of the divorce papers. "Susan Devereaux Morrison, you have been served with a court summons," I said. When I turned to leave, Susan jumped to her feet and tried to follow me, but Mickey turned and frowned, and his 6'5" frame was so intimidating that she burst into tears and sank to the steps, her friends trying to comfort her. But Beth had the last word. She walked over to Susan with a vicious look on her face. "Bitch," she shouted. "You had a good man, but now, thank God he's gone." The music faded. The dancers melted into the crowd, and passers-by stood in awkward silence. All that could be heard was the sobbing of the three girls sitting with their heads bowed at the feet of Christopher Columbus. Mickey walked Beth and me to a taxi, and the three of us headed for Brooklyn. I wanted to go back and ask Susan how she liked the surprise, but I decided it wasn't necessary. Susan tried repeatedly to contact me, but I stubbornly refused to answer her calls, emails, or text messages. I waited for her high-powered lawyer to contact mine, and then I laid out my terms. I was willing to talk to Susan only if we could meet and agree on a property settlement. After lengthy negotiations, we finally agreed on a date and time for the meeting. It was to take place at Susan's law firm. My lawyer didn't like that, but by that point, he was already quite unhappy with me. I didn't care. We were shown into a conference room the size of Susan's apartment. I think my lawyer was scared, but I knew I was in control, so it didn't bother me. The only thing that surprised me was that Walter, Susan's father, was sitting next to my daughter. I should have known, I thought. He must have had to bail her out of trouble more than once. When everyone sat down, I looked at them across the table. Susan's lawyer was staring at me like I was some strange insect he'd found under a microscope. Walter looked at me reproachfully. He couldn't stand that I was hurting his precious daughter. And Susan didn't want to look at me at all. Finally, Susan's lawyer spoke. "So, Mr. Morrison, we are all gathered here today at your insistence to discuss the division of property in connection with the dissolution of this marriage. We have a proposal that I think you will find more than fair. Perhaps we should begin with that." My lawyer cleared his throat and began to speak, but I interrupted him. "Forget it," I said firmly. Walter Devereaux leaned over to his daughter and tried to whisper in her ear, but I could clearly hear him say, "I told you to make him sign a prenuptial agreement." Her lawyer was confused by this exchange and tried to redirect our attention to the proposed agreement, but again, to no avail. "Forget it," I told him. I turned to Walter. "Mr. Devereaux, I married your daughter for love, not for money. I doubt a man like you could ever understand that, but my father raised me to believe that a man's honor is far more important than his wealth." Then I turned back to Susan's lawyer. "There are two things I want included in the agreement, and if you agree to them, I will gladly conclude these negotiations without any other demands or conditions." I heard Walter mutter discontentedly, "Here it comes, here it comes." "First, I want Susan to return my grandmother's wedding rings. They symbolize a commitment to share our lives, leaving everyone else behind. And now we all know that Susan was not, and never was, going to make that commitment." I watched as Susan lowered her head to the table and began to cry. "The second thing I need is 30 minutes alone with Susan, during which she will promise to answer my questions honestly. Give me those two things and I will drop all other claims to this marriage." My lawyer sat shaking his head. He knew Devereaux well, and probably had an idea of the old man's condition. He was very disappointed to learn that he wouldn't be able to get a penny out of him. But Walter Devereaux suddenly perked up. "Could you put that in writing, young man?" he asked impatiently. I looked at him coldly. "In my family, a man's word is his bond, but for the sake of your family, I will sign such an agreement." My sarcasm went right over his head. He was too busy to have his family lawyer draw up an agreement. Then he turned to Susan. "Give them to him," he ordered. "Give him those damn rings and we'll get out of this mess." She continued to sob, and he stroked her hand. "Damn it, baby. If they mean that much to you, Mom and Dad will buy you new ones." When she began to remove the old-fashioned rings, I stood up. "Since everyone seems to agree, I would like everyone except Susan to leave the room. My 30 minutes will begin as soon as you leave." Walter looked uncertainly at his daughter, but then stood up, grabbed the family lawyer by the arm, and pulled him toward the door. "Draw up an agreement immediately. I want him to sign it before he leaves the room." Everyone left, and Susan and I were left sitting across the table from each other. I sat there for a minute, not knowing where to start. I had been thinking about this since that day in Columbus Circle, but now I didn't know where to begin. Finally, I decided to just take another step forward. When did this start, Susan? I asked in a quiet, even voice. She looked up and knew what I was talking about. I don't think it ever stopped, she said. Eye contact kept sending me profiles of all these handsome men, and I guess I just wanted to try them all. But I thought you loved me, I said. I did, Peter, I really did. But when we left the house and you left town, I got bored and wanted to have some fun. It didn't seem right to try something else, especially since I was sure you'd never find out. So why did you agree to marry me if you felt that way? Oh, Peter, it was so beautiful when you took me to the Empire State Building and proposed on the roof. No man had ever cared about me that much. It was so exciting that I just decided to say yes. I knew Mom and Dad would be furious, but that just added to the excitement. I paused to process what I had heard. How long after the honeymoon did you start seeing each other again? Baby, I promised myself I would be faithful to you after we got married. But then you had to go back to the West Coast, and I was bored sitting around doing nothing. Then I got a new batch of profiles from Eye Contact, and it reminded me how exciting it was to meet a new man. I missed that so much, baby, but I didn't do anything because I didn't want to hurt you. Then I found out I had to move back to Boston in a week, and I realized that Boston was a whole different world. I changed my profile on Eye Contact to Boston, and of course I got a new batch of profiles. And when I went there, her voice trailed off. We both knew what she had done. I tried to remember the days after our wedding. I remembered our first trip to the West Coast after our honeymoon because I couldn't wait to get back to Susan. The timing of her first trip to Boston wasn't as clear, but I don't think it was more than a week or two. Less than a month after our honeymoon, she was already cheating on me. So every time you went to Boston, I didn't ask the question, and she just nodded guiltily. I decided to take a different approach. What about Missy and Brianna? I asked. Did they know? Oh, yes, she replied. We were together so long that we had no secrets from each other. And they didn't mind? I asked. Oh, no, they did mind. And then she stopped abruptly. But I already knew what she was talking about. So you gave your men to them, I suggested. After you tried them, you gave them to Missy and Brianna. She blushed. Well, it's not that there was anything wrong with them, she said. 3 Miss Kidders, I thought. More like 3 little sluts. No wonder they didn't want to share their happy little family. I turned back to her. One last question, Susan. Why? Why did you have so many men? Why couldn't you stop? Why couldn't you just love me? I don't know, she whispered. When I got to Vassar, I was voted the most beautiful freshman. At first it was great, I liked all the attention. Then one of the upperclassmen wanted me to be his steady girlfriend. At first it was fun, but then it became routine, and I dumped him. I tried dating another guy, and the same thing happened. By then I realized what the problem was. I liked the excitement of a new relationship. The first few dates with a guy were like a roller coaster ride. Every time was a surprise. After that, I dated different guys almost every week, and I loved it. She looked at me slyly. Missy and Brianna loved it too. Anyway, she continued, when I finished school, my father found me a job at an investment bank. The job was great, but the hours were long and most of the guys in the office were married, so I didn't have many opportunities. I tried going to singles bars, but they were so boring. A lot of the guys were real jerks. Then I tried online dating, and that worked better. Then I found the Eye Contact website, and most of its members were top-notch. Every week, new profiles appeared in my inbox. It was like my own personal buffet. As she spoke, she became more and more animated. I stood up. Half an hour hadn't passed, but I had heard everything I wanted to hear. Seeing that I had stood up, she stood up too. Baby, I know I hurt you, but I love you. You're really special. I know it's not a traditional marriage, but if you can accept my little weakness, we could be so happy together. Everything could be really good, baby. I can even introduce you to Missy and Brianna if you want. My stomach twisted, but before I could say anything, Susan's father and her lawyer entered the room, accompanied by my lawyer. Lawyer Devereaux handed me a piece of paper and a pen. I believe this agreement fully meets your requirements, Mr. Morrison, and your lawyer has no objections. I looked at him, and he nodded. I reached across the table, took my grandmother's rings, and put them in my pocket. Then I took the pen he offered me, signed the document, and dated it. When I stood up, I saw Walter Devereaux looking at me with curiosity. "Perhaps I misjudged you, young man," he said, extending his hand. "Quite possible," I replied. "I certainly misjudged your daughter, but I believe my assessment of you is correct." With that, I ignored his hand and walked out of the room. I was lucky. The guy from Google who lived with Mickey and Beth was transferred, and I was able to move in with them. It was great living with them. They both cared a lot about my feelings and emotions, and when I felt particularly sad, which was often, they tried to find ways to cheer me up. On the day my divorce was finalized, they threw a big party at the club where Mickey worked. I was probably the only straight guy in the crowd, but I still had a good time. Despite all their efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was a failure. I had tried playing the game of love and lost. I had tried love and marriage and lost again. Even moving in with Mickey and Beth felt like a loss, not because of them, but because I was back where I started. I saw Susan once. I had to go to a meeting downtown that lasted late into the night. When it ended, I was hungry and went into a small place that was bright and noisy. I realized I needed more of that in my life, so I went in and sat down at a table to order some food. I noticed her at the far end of the room. She was laughing and flirting with a cute guy a couple of years younger than me. I lost my appetite and backed away, but she didn't notice me. I had no reason to expect her to have changed, but the fact that she hadn't depressed me even more. I think I matured a few weeks later when I got a call from a recruitment agency. If you work for a popular company like Google, calls from recruiters are commonplace. This guy was looking for someone to head up network security for a large hospital chain. At the time, there was a lot of work being done to digitize medical records so that different departments and specialists could easily share information. Hospitals are just now starting to think about how this will affect network security. It sounded pretty interesting, but what caught my attention was that the job was in Nashville. My old hometown had become one of the leading centers for hospital management. I wonder what Walter Devereaux would say about that, I thought with a smile. I was offered the job and decided to take it. New York had lost its appeal for me, and this offer came at just the right time. It was time to move on. Looking at my suitcases lying on the floor of our apartment's living room, I was surprised at how little I owned. I must be the cheapest mover in this company, I thought with a smile. The only difficult part of the move was saying goodbye to Mickey and Beth. When we first met, they seemed so different, but now they had become very dear to me. I reached out to shake Mickey's hand, but he hugged me so tightly that I remembered how big and strong he really was. "Don't forget us, Peter," he said solemnly. "We won't forget you." I wanted to say something sarcastic, but I couldn't. "I won't forget you, man, I promise," I swore to him. Then I turned to Beth and saw tears in her eyes again. I couldn't speak, afraid I would start crying too, so I raised my hand to kiss her on the cheek. To my surprise, she turned her head so that I kissed her on the lips. Then she hugged me tightly, turned away, and ran to her room. There was nothing left for me to do but pack my things and catch a taxi. Nashville again. Nashville seemed both strange and familiar to me. I missed the non-stop hustle and bustle of the Big Apple, but I liked the southern hospitality of the people of Nashville. And just as important, I loved all the greenery. In New York, except for a few trees growing sadly out of the sidewalk, there were only concrete buildings, but in Nashville, there was grass and trees everywhere. I didn't realize how much I had missed it. I ended up buying a century-old house in East Nashville, an old neighborhood where young families were renovating. In addition to the bungalow, I now had several huge old trees and a small lawn to mow. It was the right decision. Once I settled in, I decided to take up running again, something I had struggled with in New York. I joined a running club, which not only gave me a chance to exercise regularly, but also to meet people with similar interests. Many of them were women, and so I gradually started dating again. So there I was at a nightclub on a Saturday night, and my date and I saw a female performer on stage. She looked at me. "I don't get it. Why are they doing that?" I couldn't help but think of Mickey and Beth and how strange and unusual they seemed to me when I first met them. But then I remembered Susan, and I realized that she was even more of a mystery. I still didn't understand her and doubted that I ever would. I remembered that evening at Grand Central Station and decided that perhaps Lady Gaga's answer was appropriate. I turned to my companion and shrugged. Maybe they were born that way. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for updates.